Was Jack Dragna a well-respected and feared mafioso, or was he weak and ineffective? Well, it all depends on who you read. The 1991 Hollywood film Bugsy, which starred Warren Beatty, Harvey Keitel, and the adorable Annette Bening, has a scene in which Bugsy is abusing and humiliating California mob boss Jack Dragna. At one point in the scene, Bugsy makes him get down on all fours and bark like a dog and oink like a pig. Did this event really take place? Probably not, but it still rings true for the way the National Crime Syndicate, set up after the Castellammarese War, viewed the Dragna family. The powers back east and their liaisons on the West Coast jokingly referred to the Dragna mob as the Mickey Mouse Mafia, and Jack Ignatius Dragna was the head mouseketeer. Born in Corleone, Sicily on April 18, 1891, Jack Dragna rose to the top of the California mob with the blessing of the syndicate, holding the position of boss for about 12 years during the 1940s and 50s. He was considered weak and a bumbling idiot by most who knew him. The National Commission allowed him to act as the boss of the West Coast, but according to some reports, they kept him on a very short leash. He wasn't chosen for his position because he was a mastermind of crime or a good organizer. Years later, one insider would explain he was simply the best of a bad lot. Dragna arrived in Los Angeles in 1914 and was convicted of extortion a year later. He served 3 years in the San Quentin prison as a result of the conviction. Despite numerous arrests on other charges, this was his only prison sentence during his career in organized crime. Dragna and his cohorts were good at one thing: petty extortion. He would dispatch his own men to threaten a mark with burning their business or murder. The owner would come crying to Dragna, who would then explain for a price all would be taken care of. The fearful businessman paid up, never knowing that it was Jack Dragna's men who had threatened him. After Prohibition, the LA Mafia was slow to take advantage of legal gambling in Las Vegas, allowing Eastern cartels to stake their claims. The LA mob was happy to operate gambling ships off the California coast instead, a practice that continued from 1920 until summer of 1939. Mob historian Carl Sifakis explains, Dragna was a man who thought small. Dragna's big problem as far as the Eastern Syndicate was concerned was that he was from an older generation, limited in his abilities and not adept at putting the frighteners on his enemies. As evidence of this charge, when Dragna finally attempted to gain a foothold in Las Vegas, he failed miserably and was practically laughed out of the city. What makes a mobster successful is presence and follow-through. A tough guy who walks into a joint and looks intimidating is one thing, but following up on the promised threat is essential. A mobster who is incapable of showing that he has the power and the guts to pull off a beating just looks pathetic. And this was Jack Dragna. Independent bookmakers, loan sharks, and others knew that Dragna was in no position to shake them down. So when he demanded protection money from them, they shrugged it off without fear of any repercussions. About this time, the economy in California began to boom, and the newly formed National Crime Syndicate looked west and saw the promised land. They wanted a new home for their racing wire to cash in on gambling at a national level. But they didn't call on Jack Dragna nor his family to run the show. Instead, they sent Bugsy Siegel, and Charles Lucky Luciano made it clear to Dragna not to interfere or else. When Siegel and Mickey Cohen arrived in California, Dragna hated the idea of playing second fiddle on his own patch, especially when the interlopers were pushing for a new wire service for bookies, one in which he would be left out in the dark. And as if to add insult to injury, The Chicago outfit settled right in Dragna's backyard, the movie industry, and took over the major unions, and again, Dragna was left on the outside looking in. On June 20th, 1947, Dragna's nemesis, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, was forced into permanent retirement. The word on the street was circulated that Dragna himself did the dirty deed, but no one really believed it. He simply didn't have the guts to pull it off. Again quoting Carl Sifakis, despite his denials, Meyer Lansky pushed for Siegel's execution and would hardly have trusted Dragna to carry it off successfully. As near as can be determined, the Siegel assassination was carried out by longtime Lansky hitman Frankie Carbo. Naturally, Lansky's people spread the gospel that Dragna had done the job. After Siegel's death, Dragna thought his time had come, that he would be able to take over the California and Vegas rackets. But the Chicago outfit and New York families continued their assault, pushing Dragna to the back of the line. In his biography, The Last Mafioso, Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano rehearsed an event in which Dragna tried to shake down Meyer Lansky to get a piece of the Vegas action. Lansky thought the whole thing was a joke. He eventually made Dragna an offer in which he could buy into the Flamingo Hotel and Casino for $125,000. Dragna tried frantically to come up with the money, but was unable to do so. In the end, Dragna wound up with nothing. Many reported that Lansky knew beforehand that Dragna could never come up with that much cash. Basically, they concluded, Lansky made him an offer he had to refuse. As the decade of the 1950s approached, Dragna's influence continued to wane. The Chicago outfit and the New York families continued to nibble away like termites at the small foundation of the Dragna mob until they were reduced to nothing more than a youthful street gang. Jack Dragna died February 23, 1956. He is best remembered for his failures, especially his failure to eliminate Bugsy's right-hand man, Mickey Cohen, who had been chosen to run things after Bugsy's demise. Cohen eventually died of natural causes in 1976. J. Robert Nash concludes, Dragna was succeeded by family members Frank D. Simone, Nick Licata, and Dominic Brooklier. In 1974, Jack's nephew, Louis Tom Dragna, was dubbed the Reluctant Prince for turning down the chance to run the LA Rackets. Instead, he struck a deal in 1975 with the Gambino family to share the Western Territories. The realignment was further complicated by the arrival of Chicago gangster Anthony Spilatro and Brooklyn-born Mike Rizzatello.